It's time now for business. Let's say hello to Kate Moody.
Hi, Francois.
Kate, one of the things perhaps Theresa May's banking on, because she's going to lose that vote, it seems, in Parliament, is a sharp reaction from the markets that will jolt them lawmakers into maybe giving a second look or a third look to her deal. What's the likelihood of that, though?
Well, it's always hard to say with the markets, isn't it, Francois? And much as we don't want to predict anything when it comes to Brexit, we also don't want to predict how markets would react. The currency markets, though, are particularly reactive to these kinds of situations. The British pound sterling plummeted after the referendum back in 2016. It has lost about 10% against the US dollar since last April because of the uncertainty surrounding this process. We've seen some volatility on Monday, mostly weak there. The pound down nearly 1% against the US dollar. That figure's a little bit off actually there. It's down about 1% this hour, trading at about 1.27 to the dollar, a little softer against the euro, which of course will also be affected by whatever outcome emerges this evening. The major European indices, meanwhile, managed slight gains, with the exception of Milan, where the banking sector dragged down trade there. Wall Street also rising this hour, driven more by corporate results than European politics at the moment, although it could react if the vote takes place in London during New York trading hours. Now for some insight, let's cross to London and speak to Ranko Berich, head of market analysis at Monex Europe. Ranko, thanks for being with us this evening. European markets relatively calm as we head towards this vote in the House of Commons. Have investors already priced in what most people expect to be a defeat for Theresa May's Brexit deal?
I think mostly markets have priced in the status quo up until today, so we've not really had any new information in terms of what's going to happen after the vote, the breakdown of the vote, and as such we haven't seen any sharp moves in sterling, UK equities, so on and so forth. Now, we don't expect that calm to last. Obviously we will get a deluge of material new information that's very relevant for markets, as recently as quickly as perhaps 3 hours from now. So even though it has been a quiet day, it's probably not going to last through the evening.
Now, currency markets are often where we see the first and most extreme reaction. How do you expect sterling to fare?
So it depends on the extent of May's likely defeat. So if we see quite a large rejection of May's plan, we're talking upwards of 150 votes, 200 votes, so on and so forth, we expect some sterling downside in the order of up to 3%. Now, why isn't it more dramatic? You've got the historic defeat in the Commons for the government, simply because, as you mentioned earlier, markets have priced in a great deal of downside risk. Now, on the other side of the coin, if the defeat is actually more narrow than expected, so in the order of, say, less than 100 votes, maybe 80, 50, so on and so forth, then we actually expect some sterling downside. Even though May's defeated, if it's a narrow defeat, perhaps with some sort of fence-sitting abstentions, that could be a signal to markets that perhaps she does in fact have a chance of getting some semblance of her current deal across the line.
There have been some suggestions that a no-deal or hard Brexit scenario could even lead to parity with the euro. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, parity with the euro is completely realistic. The reason for that is simply that the UK's economy is exhausted from the last 2 years of Brexit as it is, near the bottom of the league tables for comparable economies' growths. If there is a no-deal Brexit, there are a myriad of shocks, very well detailed in, for example, both independent and official research reports. You'll see an initial shock to the pound and then a secondary shock once the extent of damage to the economy is actually clear. Now, again, I must be clear at this point, that's looking like a tail risk. There is a majority in Parliament for avoiding a no-deal Brexit, but the threat of that eventuality is certainly enough to make sterling very volatile due to the sheer amount of downside risk that's already in the price.
Is there a scenario in which you might expect sterling to get stronger in the months to come?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably for what it's worth, that's probably the most credible base case when you look through to the end of the year. As I said, there's a majority in Parliament for avoiding a no deal. At the moment, the most important dynamic for Brexit is simply once that no deal risk is removed one way or another, and it could be through a delay of the date of departure to give Parliament more time for indicative votes, a referendum, what have you. Any of those scenarios, in our view, are likely to lead to sterling upside, perhaps not massive, but basically any removal of that possibility of no deal is going to be sterling positive.
Now, looking at the deal that's up for discussion, is there anything that Theresa May has negotiated that would reassure businesses about what's to come if somehow this vote were to give the green light?
So to be clear, business confidence in the UK is not awful as it is. It's the economy is slowing, but that's actually a fairly consistent theme. If you look at German data, French data, the region is not looking particularly great at the moment. So there's not really any red flashing lights looking in business confidence at the moment. As I said, really, the details of the deal are almost irrelevant at this point. All that matters is just that the risk of a complete sort of disruptive, as the Bank of England would call it, disorderly Brexit is actually removed. So I'm not worried about the details of the deal. It's just that something gets through Parliament.
All right, some kind of deal. Waiting to see. That's all we can do for now. Ranko Berich, thanks so much for joining us here on France 24. Of course, Francois, I'll be back throughout the evening to check in on how the markets are responding.
Some kind of deal.
Some kind of deal.
I might quote him when we do in the debate.
Some kind of deal, any deal. But again, as we've been hearing, chances pretty slim for now.
All right, many thanks for that, Kate Moody.